the top level story is cyber is really important. And its importance has proliferated right the way from government services and healthcare through to consumer and everything else. So I think there's real attention and investment here. And I think, the meta patterns are going to be things like agility, modularity, and making sure a lot of the sort of cyber technologies talk with each other better. I certainly see some of those as some pretty big meta patterns.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Now today I am very privileged to have the fantastic Simon Moffatt of the Cyber Hut. I could introduce him, but his list of credentials go on quite significantly, so I'll let him do his own intro.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, James. Great to be here. I'm not sure I can live up to the expectations of being so good, I guess, but Simon Moffatt, founder of an organisation called the Cyber Hut. Been in the, cyber world since 2001. So that's 22 years, which when I say that out loud is a little bit daunting. I'm only 26, to be honest, so that's quite an achievement. But no, two decades doing this stuff, it is amazing, really, because any length of time in any technology sector, you see so many things change, both people and technologies and priorities alter. So I've been fortunate enough to really focus exclusively really on identity and access management. So, authentication, authorization, access control, anything of that ilk, really. And really, really fortunate to have dedicated sort of 2 decades in that space, it's been really, really luxurious, if you like. I've seen many changes. I've worked in industry, worked in the consultancy space, worked for a large period for software vendors making software in authentication, authorization, identity management, identity governance, identity analytics, a bit of AI, a bit of ML, which I've been really, really fortunate to do. And then I guess since 2021, I've been running a business called the Cyber Hut, which is essentially looking and tracking all of the trends in the cyber world, specifically within identity and access management, acting as a buy-side advocate, if you like, analysing vendors, looking at patterns, looking at trends, standards, helping release research and buyer's guides and reports on what's happening really in the global identity space, which again I feel quite privileged to do this stuff. I get to interview and work with different vendors, understand what they're building and why. And I think it's just great to see cyber in general becoming a real high priority. I think people now really realise that it's important to secure personal identifiable information, to secure ourselves, to secure your online banking, employees, staff. And that is great to see all of the sort of innovation in change there. And really the Cyber Hut's, trying to help the buy side navigate the complexities of this ever changing world we live in. So it's I feel quite privileged to be in this space and hopefully trying to provide a bit of clarity to the world in which we live, I guess.
Fantastic. So take us back in time to was it 2001? You said when you got into it.
Long time ago, yeah. I mean, before the internet, I guess. I mean, I look back in 2001. It doesn't feel like 20 odd years. Number one, it feels about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. And I think, like most people, I sort of rolled out of university. 21, didn't really have a good plan of what I wanted to do with my career. I did economics actually at university, which really unrelated to the cyber world. Couldn't be further apart really, but it gave me a good understanding of, I guess, business and how we make decisions in the business world and why we do certain things. And I rolled out of university at 21, big student loan, big student debt as most people do. And I think I left the university on the Friday and think on the Monday I started a temporary job, like you do, sort of take any job that comes along. I took a 3-month temporary job working for a large insurance company. And essentially, they were doing a project for their mainframe identities. So you'll get this, like 21 years of old
mainframe.
It was obviously a job nobody wanted, right? So they had all of their they had 36,000 mainframe identities in this insurance company, and essentially they'd run out of IDs. So there was like a 5-digit ID which people were logging in with, and essentially they'd run out. So what they were having to do was essentially just take the existing IDs that people were using, essentially copy them into a new format so that they'd have a bigger address space, essentially for new users to be created. So why not get a load of very cheap 21-year-olds to come in and essentially do some really boring IT security administration for a 3-month period. Mm-hmm. It was great. And 3 months turned into 6 months, as these projects do, which turned into 12 months. I ended up doing it for about a year. And essentially that was my first foothold really into anything to do with technology and cyber and identity and access management. And it was a really good apprenticeship, if you like, doing things by hand. There was no automation. There was no systems. There was certainly no AI and ML and anything of this ilk. And it was a steep learning curve, but it was great. It was a really good foundation. And then essentially I spent about 4 or 5 years at that insurance company in-house. I moved on to do some directory services work in Novell, using Novell NDS, Novell Direct NetWare admin and all that stuff. That was fabulous as well. Looking after 200 or 300 servers in a sort of distributed server farm, which is great. Great experience. Really, before automation, having to visit sites to do upgrades and manage the directory and this sort of stuff, which was fabulous. So it was a really good sort of 4 to 5 year apprenticeship, really, doing things like being on call and doing standby and upgrades and really understanding how sort of security infrastructure works in a big company, really. And it was fascinating to see that and learn from people who had been doing it obviously a lot longer than myself. And then from there, I moved into the sort of consultancy space for a couple of years. And then I essentially then spent about 15 years working with software vendors. I was really sort of quite lucky in the sort of mid-2000s, 2007, 2008, something like this. I joined a company called Vayu, which really, really small startup, a US-based startup, who were looking to essentially build out a team in Europe. There's about sort of 8 or 9 of us in Europe doing some really quite sort of esoteric, specialized role-based access control work, role-based access control, identity audit, identity sort of certification work, where you'd go into large companies, typically financial services, not sort of dissimilar to the insurance company I worked with at the beginning. Big financial services companies, that they needed to get a handle on their access control, really, who had access to what and why. Very much driven by sort of compliance initiatives, really, things like Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI DSS, a lot of other US regulation as well. So you really had to prove, as a regulated industry, you had good understanding of who had access to which systems, why did they have access to these systems, getting line managers to approve access and approve the sort of staff who worked for them, and then somehow try and shoehorn all that stuff into a role-based access control model, which, if I'm honest, very rarely works. Very, very big and complex and fragile. But I did that for a number of years, and I sort of went on an acquisition journey, if you like. The company I was at, Vayu, at the time, was acquired by Sun Microsystems. So I guess a lot of listeners will remember Sun from the days of Java and Solaris and all of the server hardware which powered the .com boom and subsequent bust, of course. And Sun had a really huge portfolio of software, and sort of the startup I was at got acquired into there. So I sort of went from working at a company that had 70 people to suddenly one that had, I don't know what Sun had, 40, 50,000 staff or something, quite a big change. And I was at Sun for a couple of years. I ran the European sort of technical side of their Sun Role Manager product. And then they were then acquired by Oracle. So the sort of shark kept coming along and buying up and getting bigger and bigger. So I went from a startup into Sun Microsystems, and then Oracle came along and bought out Sun Microsystems back in 2010. I think that would have been something like this, which was yet another interesting twist. And I guess the interesting thing there was Sun Microsystems had a load of security software, but as did Oracle. And obviously there was overlap, and there was a bit of conflict and competition, and a lot of products on sort of both sides were end of life, I guess, probably more so on the Sun side because Oracle was the acquirer. So there's a lot of technology, good technology, which Sun Microsystems had, which just went by the wayside essentially. And a lot of my colleagues were sort of made redundant or whatever. And I was at Oracle for probably about another 2 years, running something called Oracle Identity Analytics, which was the sort of rebranded Sun products. Again, looking at things like role-based access control and access review and identity analytics and such. I did that for a couple of years, and then I left there and joined the sort of freelancing world. Did a couple of years freelancing back in industry, working in big telcos, in financial services, helping with identity, access management, helping with sort of transformation projects in that world. Bit of work in Germany, a bit of work in the UK, which was interesting. And then I spent another 8 years at another vendor called ForgeRock, and they were another identity and access management vendor. Essentially, they came out of the ashes of Sun Microsystems, if you like. They'd taken a lot of the Sun Microsystems open source software and essentially just use that as the foundation to build some new capabilities around sort of zero trust identity and single sign-on and the whole sort of next generation of identity and access management. I was fortunate enough, I spent a good eight and a half years in that space, a bit of product management work, a bit of sort of technical sales leadership stuff. Managed to write a book in that time on consumer identity as well, which I think is sort of now become quite a popular area where we're trying to do things online, so things like online banking or maybe retail or maybe buy a Netflix film or whatever. We're doing so much stuff online, and all of that has obviously a security and identity element to it. So I spent a year or two researching a book on that, which was pretty interesting. And then last 2 or 3 years, I guess, looking at all of the vendors in that area, really looking at identity, looking at access management, looking at authentication, things like passwordless, multi-factor authentication, identity and security for the Internet of Things and devices, which I think is still quite nascent and quite emerging. And I feel quite privileged really to still be doing this stuff and hopefully providing a bit of value still after all these years.
It's quite interesting actually, because I mean, I started my career a little bit further back, not by much though. I mean, I've been in it for now about 25 years. And the tool sets we had back then were nothing compared to the vendors and the tools and the solutions we have in this space now. I mean, back when I first got in, it was a little bit of AV, firewall if you were lucky. I saw the advent of mail checkers because, I remember some of the stuff you used to catch some of the employees looking at via email and on the internet back then, and that was in the Wild West of the internet. And now, we've got all kinds of products, all kinds of tools. We've got threat intelligence. We've got, GRC tools that aren't ridiculously cumbersome and what have you. And it's, we've seen a lot of technological change in that time as well, and a lot of change in the way that we apply security. And I mean, what are the kind of major changes that you've seen and you've perceived with your particular discipline? Because I mean, I do remember a time, God forbid, going back to the deep dark depths where people used to share passwords all the time, and you'd be saying, "Please don't do that," and they'd be like, "No, we're gonna." What have you seen in that time? I mean, you mentioned a lot of vendors. I mean, do you echo sort of that change, or do you see it from a different perspective?
There's been so many things change, and I think you're absolutely right. 20 years ago, no way did we have the technology that we have today. It was much simpler world, simpler times, I guess. But I think in a way that helps, actually. I think it helped security because it wasn't as complex. I think one of the big issues
to go wrong.
there is. I think today, 2023, I think the sort of sub-industries developing around identifying misconfiguration in systems, especially in cloud systems, which are no fault of their own. They are complex. They're complicated systems to set up infrastructure, to set up permissions and identities, and you've got all of that all the mechanics of that to manage. But there's a whole host of misconfiguration there. You can get something up and running in Amazon or in Google or in Microsoft Azure or whatever. Is it the right way of doing it? You often get something working, you don't quite know how, and the right applications or people have access to it. Then you step away from it and you're like, oh, I don't want to touch it now because it's working. And often it may well be, you may have identities that have too many permissions, or maybe it's enough to get them working, but maybe not in the correct way. So I think today the level of stuff you need is really high. And I think there's a visibility issue, there's the misconfiguration angle. So it's not always a better thing to have more stuff going on. So I think, okay, in 2001, absolutely, there was some pretty naive practices. You mentioned sharing passwords. It happened all the time. As you did, people would pick poor passwords. There would be no multi-factor authentication. If somebody left an organization, those accounts were probably never disabled or switched off. So there's really quite poor hygiene, if you like, quite bad practice. But I think equally there were some benefits to maybe the attack surface was maybe a little bit smaller, maybe. I'm not necessarily saying it's better in that respect. But I think definitely we have more kit today. We have more software, more complexity. I think organizations are inherently more complicated. They are part of much bigger supply chains. It's very rare that you pick any organization today, whether it's, a retailer or a manufacturer or insurance or whatever, that doesn't rely on a whole host of other organizations to make something work. And I think all of that supply chain angle just introduces a whole host of different attack vectors and different entry points into the world of malicious activity and data theft and whatever else. So I think the level of complexity it's exponentially grown in 20 years for sure.
It's absolutely correct as well, because it is weird. I remember it being relatively simple to secure an environment because we didn't really have a lot to secure. Then it became more complicated, but it became easier because then it wasn't using terminals where we had to try and figure out what the exact terminology for the string of characters was. And it went into wizards, which meant we had to go back to terminals to do some of the stuff that we really wanted to do because we were a little bit old school back then. And then it kind of cloud came along, and that really kind of changed the world. Like you, I remember being part of the poor guys and gals that used to have to open up the rack and, pull out the large server. There was no small, thin servers back then. It was all large and it took 4 of you to pick it up. And now, you can have hundreds of those servers in relatively tiny, tiny spaces compared to what we used to. But one of the things that I definitely wanted to pick up on was, from my perspective, it has gone a little bit crazy when it comes to the as-a-service functions of some of the software that we use in the key software. Back in the day, it was you bought it, you installed it, maybe there'd be a database you'd have to set up or something similar. And then you would just kind of update it with updates as it came along. And maybe you had support. Obviously, you had a support function if you needed to call in and find out why a fat client wasn't working or a thin client wasn't working or something wasn't working over Citrix. Now it's all delivered via the internet, which has made things eminently easier. But from a security standpoint, it means your, as you mentioned before, your attack vectors, malicious acts. I'm no longer so much worried about the organization I'm there in dealing with at that time. I'm more concerned about the second, third, fourth generation of third-party suppliers, and I'm seeing a lot of movement in the how do we manage this third-party mishmash, because yours and I's job, it was a case of what's going on within our perimeter, what's going with the few people who remotely attach, or the remote office that comes in. And then it went to cloud, and we were like, right, okay, now we're a little bit worried about the cloud because it's housed on somebody else's stuff. And then all of a sudden now it's like, boom, we've got 1 million providers providing 1 million things to 1 million different people in the business. And, I don't know about you, but in some of my customers, their software asset registers certainly are larger than I remember them being.
Yeah, it's, you have that angle around just trying to get your arms around what you're managing, I think, number one. And there's a lack of visibility, I think, of what that infrastructure looks like, even if it's a virtual infrastructure. And then I think to overlay on top of that, you then have the sort of responsibility model. As you say, if you go back 20 years, you have a perimeter, and you have the big bad internet, or maybe you have some sort of like federation or inter-business communications. And then you've got your safe, private internal VLANs, which weren't safe and private at all. But at least you had the modicum of visibility and control. And we did this, and they did that, and there's quite distinct trust boundaries. Whereas today, I think that's much, much more blurred. You'd have say you leverage some Amazon stuff, you may then leverage some Google Cloud infrastructure for your servers or compute power, but then you may then have SaaS applications as well, software as a service, which you have no control over. You're essentially buying an API or buying access to an application or an outcome. So the sort of responsibility model is much more shared, but that introduces a lot more complexity as well around what does the cloud service provider do versus the consumer of that cloud service? Who does what when things go wrong? Who's ultimately responsible for the data?
Who's the data owner?
Or for the identities involved? And so the boundaries are much more blurred and virtual, and there's a lot more sort of handoff, if you like, from somebody logging in to access a spreadsheet or something. There's a lot more steps involved as to who's doing what, when, and why. And I think those responsibility boundaries, I think, are quite tough these days if you're a CISO or a CIO trying to sort of work out, we do this, we're in control of this, and actually this SaaS application, we don't have the visibility into it. We're paying whatever, 50 grand a month or 50 grand a year for a service. We don't really get to see the logs. We don't get to see how it's operating and how it's working. And yeah, there's sort of service level agreements and there's trust sort of anchors and things there, but it can be quite complex and quite difficult, I think, to see who's doing what and who owns what and who has the responsibility for keeping that stuff up and running. And I think, that brings that complexity, brings a lot of issues with things like visibility and responsibility, I guess. But I don't see that improving either, actually, any time soon. I think organizations, they just want to outsource a lot of risk and probably quite rightly so, leverage the cloud, leverage specialist providers. Why would you want to have a big server rack full of HP or Compaq or Dell hardware, right? God. When you can just say, let's just go and give it to somebody else to worry about, and I'll rent some sort of computing power and stuff. So I don't think that's a bad thing. If I was in that situation, I would do exactly the same. But equally, it does introduce some responsibility boundaries, which I think are quite complex to navigate, I guess.
It's frightening, actually, because there's a lot of juggling of liability. It's like, who's liable for what? So, you've got the data owners, then you've got the people looking after that data, but then you've got their people as well and their third-party service providers. And it can get quite messy. And with cyber liability insurance, dare I say it, in the state that it is at the moment, which is, well, who knows where it is at the moment. Every time I check up on it, the situation has changed, whether it's Lloyd's of London wanting to change wording because things aren't working from a wording perspective, or be it, dare I say it, a very large organisation winning a 1.6 billion pound or dollar, case against their insurers. It's getting really, really tough to figure out what to do. And I'm seeing a lot of intelligence companies coming out into this space as well, like third-party intelligence companies. And some of them are really, really good. A lot of them are really good, but it's not giving you kind of the full picture. It's almost giving you a panacea saying, oh, look, everything looks fine from the outside world. And it's like, but as an InfoSec person, I don't care about what the perception is. I actually want to know where they are.
Yeah. The insurance ones is fascinating. Actually, we've done a bit of research on this one, like more from an identity perspective and more around, what the cyber insurance companies sort of are asking their clients to do. You have to do these certain things before we will underwrite and insure you. And it's like, you have to have multi-factor authentication. It has to be rolled out to at least 80% of your users, and this and this and this. And I think there's just so much uncertainty. I think organizations, they're scared. They don't really know whether their security controls will cover them if they get attacked. But equally, the insurance companies are going, well, crikey, how on earth do we measure an organization for their competency or their controls or their level of cyber maturity? So there's a lot of uncertainty on either side. So the insurance guys are going, well, you need to have all these things in place. You need to have a CISO and a data protection officer. You need to have whatever, next generation firewalls and audits and MFA and everything else to at least give them a level of confidence the organization is competent enough. I think both sides are probably a little bit in the wrong in that respect, in the sense of it's quite hard, I think, still to measure the level of cyber maturity in organizations. I think there's a good quote, and I don't quite know who this is attributed to, but there's typically two types of organizations: those who know they've been hacked and those who don't. Essentially saying everyone's been hacked at some stage, especially if you are a large enterprise with something worth hacking. You've probably got the bad guys in your network already, and cyber insurance isn't going to help in that respect, really. But I do think there's that. I guess back to the responsibility angle, you want the insurance so you can get some cash back, so you can at least, say to your shareholders, yeah, okay, we have been breached, but we've done as well as we can, and we have got a bit of a safety net there to look at investigations or, apply some controls retrospectively. But yeah, I think the insurance landscape is quite a difficult one to navigate, and I don't see things like premiums stabilizing anytime soon like they do with cars. I think I've not had to purchase cyber insurance for a large company, but I imagine it fluctuates probably year by year. The cost of that and how much gets paid out if you actually needed it would probably be a little bit different as well, I guess.
And it is tough, I mean, it's like I've read a number of the things that they ask organizations, and I don't think it's enough, but I don't think, their insurers, they don't really understand what they're asking for. I mean, asking for a bit of AV and a firewall and a CISO, it doesn't make a defense in depth, but equally they're insurers, But it's interesting because I think, this inability to rely on, insurance for your cyber aspects of security is kind of driving people more towards their defense in depth and reevaluating it I mean, it's strange because it's like we had the cloud thing, which really started to change the way that we consume our technology. Then we had the kind of as a service thing, which really started pushing in that same direction. And then we had the lockdowns where all of a sudden nobody was working in the office and seemingly nobody really went back to the office in any great amounts. And it's really been pushing and pushing and pushing towards this kind of third-party thing. And from an identity perspective, it's trying to tie everything in, and then you've got single sign-on as well, which is run by another company that it's not a server that you really control. It's a service that you're relying that they have tied off on their back end, as big as they may well be, who shall remain very, very nameless. It's kind of odd to be in this space at the moment. It's good fun, don't get me wrong, but we're seeing so much change as well. It's just like, Where do you think this is going to be in the next 5 years? I mean, do you think we're going to, obviously we've got artificial intelligence that everybody's harping on about at the moment. I have my own opinions on that, but where do you think we're going to be in 5 years? What do you think the landscape's going to kind of look like?
Oh, it's a really tough one. I think the Cyberhook, we act as analysts, I guess, and it's a question we get asked quite a lot. Is CISOs and CIOs where we're heading? What should we invest in, or what should we worry about, and which technologies should we get rid of? Which should we invest in? And it's quite hard to give definitive answers, but certainly there are definitely some emerging patterns starting to take hold. I think the pandemic was interesting because I think it was a global event, number one, and it impacted everything, not just a particular sector or a particular geography. So that really altered how businesses did work. And by that, I mean, on one hand, you had the home working thing. So suddenly it was right, wow, we normally had a secure office environment. Scrap that. Everyone's at home. Everyone's on unsecured Wi-Fi. Everyone's on either a laptop, which may be work issued, or a bring your own device. And it was suddenly a world of pain, really, for many organizations, because how on earth can you secure that, give people and staff the access they need to the systems? Maybe a lot of these systems you can't access from home, and issues with VPNs, which were seen as legacy and unscalable. So there's a lot of technical problems to deal with, and a lot of people problems, because nobody was that comfortable with working from home, if maybe that was something new. So a lot of change occurred there. I think what happened since then, I think many organizations think, well, actually, we're not quite sure what the future looks like. And the pandemic amplified the need to be agile, to have modularity in your systems, not be too rigid, not be too big monolithic IDPs or single sign-on or VPNs. Really try and break that stuff down and be agile, be responsive, try and leverage things in a much more fine-grained way, if you like. So if there is another pandemic, or maybe another, World War III or something huge that happens, we're all a little bit more reflexive to that, and we can respond to it better as organizations. So I think as a meta pattern, that is quite interesting. What does that mean really from cyber? Well, I think clearly cyber's is a top priority, maybe even more so than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And by that, I mean, people are quite familiar with, protecting their own identities, PII protection. People are aware of hackers, the bad guys, nation state threats. It's quite common parlance now. You sort of go to the BBC News, and most weeks there's a story about hacking or nation state or something to do with cyber. So I think the awareness is a lot higher, which I think people are prepared to spend and invest in cyber technologies. I think if we maybe look at the next sort of 5 years, I think stuff like AI and ML will help. And I think in certain sectors, we're seeing the sort of big data problem appearing in lots of different parts of cyber. So things like authentication, how people log in, behavior monitoring, threat detection, cyber threat intelligence. These are all really huge, big data problems, and it seems sensible to throw machine learning at that first of all, and maybe generate AI models on the back of that. So I do see benefit there. The flip side, of course, the bad guys have access to the same technologies. They have access to GPT the same as we do. So maybe there's a bit of a AI war, I guess, starting in that respect. But I do think cyber is more than just protection now. I think it's become a real part of the sort of competitive landscape. So if you are an organization, say you are a retailer, for example, and you can leverage cyber or privacy protection in a really strong way, that looks like a competitive advantage. If you can build trust with your user community, build trust with your staff, show that you are relatively safe and secure, you handle customer data well, you handle credit card information securely, that's probably seen now as a bit of a competitive edge. It's a competitive differentiator, which I think is interesting. It's not just, okay, there's some security guys in the corner and they're going to say no to everything and protect everything. It's actually, do you know what? If you get the security stuff right, you can probably sell more, you can share data better, you can go into joint ventures better, you can partner with people better, and that's all competitive. That makes you behave better as an organization. So I think is a sort of meta pattern. I definitely see that happening. I think purely from a sort of technical perspective, things like passwordless technology, I think we'll see a huge uptake in that over the next 2 to 3 years. Maybe leveraging biometrics really is the standard way of logging in. I think things like threat detection and response, looking at behaviors and tracking how people do things will improve. I think Internet of Things is everywhere. There's devices everywhere, whether it's home automation, healthcare, wearables, manufacturing. All of that stuff is going to need security, but obviously shrunk down so it works and fits in edge use cases and in sort of tiny microcontrollers and everything else from a sort of cryptographic and authentication perspective. So I see lots and lots of improvements there. But I think to me the top level story is cyber is really important. And its importance has proliferated right the way from government services and healthcare through to consumer and everything else. So I think there's real attention and investment here. And I think, the meta patterns are going to be things like agility, modularity, and making sure a lot of the sort of cyber technologies talk with each other better. I certainly see some of those as some pretty big meta patterns, I guess.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm going to be interested to see over the next couple of years, and it'd be interesting to get your take on this, because I know you advised certain elements of the UK institution that may or may not be in charge here most of the time. There seems to be a lot of legislation coming out, a lot of, we've got DORA over in, Europe, we've got the code over in Bermuda and various other different jurisdictions of government institutions are starting to develop their own kind of, this is the minimum cybersecurity you must have. But as we all well know, looking at certain frameworks that may or may not be out there at the moment. For instance, I'm a QSA. I've been a QSA for years, and it's an extensive and significant kind of compliance model. But then we have things like Cyber Essentials, which had to be simple so everybody could, comply to it. But it became so simple that it's just not effective. Do you think we're going to see a lot more complex compliance coming out? Not just here in the UK, but in Europe, obviously, with everything going on and across the world, to kind of deal with this problem with cybersecurity? Because we still have that kind of element within the business space and the government space, I'll be honest, which is, do the minimum required, to get what we need. When are we going to, first of all, when are we going to see a change in that? I think we are at the moment. But do you think governments need to wake up a little bit? I see a lot of people kind of advising them, but it's the same people. It's like, why don't you kind of get a good community of InfoSec people together to kind of advise you rather than just going for the, need I say it, some of the big integrators who may or may not have a problem recently, like a rather significant problem, and kind of approach that way. Do you think they're still kind of living in the past a little bit?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. It's a complex landscape, I guess, number one. But I think all of the sort of regulation aspects, they typically come around because there's a market failure of some sort. Having to wear a seatbelt or whatever. These are because people are not doing these things naturally. It doesn't come naturally to an organization to uphold privacy. Maybe that's a bit of a conflict with their way of working and how they go to market. Maybe it's a bit of a conflict around cyber and investing in cyber because it's hard to measure and why should we do this sort of stuff. So there's definitely a market failure in the sense of organizations maybe aren't naturally investing in sort of security and privacy technology. So we do have regulation in a whole host of different areas. As you mentioned, there's specific things in financial services, things in IoT, the Internet of Things world as well, where there's often best practices. And I think historically, you're right, compliance has been just that. Number one, it's probably been owned by legal, which is an interesting sort of sideswipe because they aren't necessarily interested in the technology. They're interested in making sure they are compliant and doing the bare minimum, or perhaps at least having process in place to show the organization is on the right track to doing certain things. Does that ultimately make them more secure? Probably not. it may result in some security controls being applied, but it's not really around the technology. It's more about a compliance piece of paper, I guess. So I think that is difficult. I do think as well, there's often a gap between regulation creation and the actual implementation of that within the real world. And that gap, as you say, how is that information being collected and captured? And I think, like any regulation or any standard, collaboration is the key here. Collaboration around practitioners who are going to be implementing, and those who will be auditing, those who will be actually creating and looking at a set of controls or steps which need to be adhered to. You have to have collaboration in those areas and really try to look at what we're really trying to achieve here. What's the outcome we're trying to retrieve? And for me, it'd be things like PII protection. It would be having a basic level of, I guess, maturity assessment around an organization to say, yeah, look, we are level 6 in our cybersecurity model or whatever it could be. That would help everybody. That would help things like cyber insurance. It would help with CISO measurement. It would help understand where you should invest on your cybersecurity journey. So I think collaboration is key. I think, yes, we will just ultimately see more regulation across the globe. I think it'll start to filter down into very, very specific areas around financial services, payment processing. Internet of Things is still very bit of a wild west, really, around how devices are built, maintained, and so on. I think we'll certainly see more around privacy and PII handling of end user data. We have things like GDPR in Europe, CCPA in the US, California, and in other parts of the US. So I see that amplifying more, and I think essentially we need more people within industry, if you like, understanding the nuance of this stuff instead of it just being a thing legal, own, and complete. And then suddenly at the end of that, you get a load of red boxes because you haven't done something and you need to rapidly go and achieve a tick box exercise. So it seems a little bit disjointed to me, and that's a really generic, global sweeping statement, of course. But I think like most things, for it to be successfully adopted and then add some value to both industry and to those who are regulating, you've got to have that collaboration circle in the middle, which needs to include specialists, needs to include practitioners, needs to include those who are actually doing the work. So I think once you get the right people around a table, things become a lot easier, I guess. And I think regulation that fails is often done in isolation, in a vacuum, and it comes down the food chain with a big stick. You have to go and do this stuff. And most organizations will avoid that if they can, if possible. But I always have hope. I do think cyber and privacy protection in general, organizations see this as a good thing. Maybe how they get there is still a little bit in the air, which is where maybe regulation can help. But I see more. I see more regulation coming, not less, I guess.
Don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Right. I mean, we're reaching the top of our time together, and I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody. And I haven't told you about this, or I may have alluded that there would be a question, but so picture a young Simon Moffatt. You're just starting to come out of university, looking around in the big wide world of 2001. You get that call, you pick it up. Would it be on a mobile? Probably just about. And it's, somebody saying, right, yeah, we've got you that placement, that first ever placement that you had. Maybe you sat in a bar somewhere in London thinking, you know what, I'm going to get a pint, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to enjoy this pint because I'm now getting into an area that I enjoy. If you could go down and sit next to yourself and give yourself a couple of tips, a couple of pieces of information, obviously, that would help you maybe either reverse some things in your career that you didn't like or just make things a little bit easier for yourself going forward, what would those be?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. It's like a letter to my 16-year-old self sort of thing, isn't it? Hindsight is wonderful, isn't it? It's a great thing. I think, I guess there's a couple of things which I've sort of learned more recently, I suppose, in life and career. And I guess number one is be agile. And I don't necessarily mean sort of agile software development, but I guess just be a little bit more light-footed. And by that, I mean, don't be too hard-coded to a particular way of thinking, or maybe a particular industry, or this particular tooling is the best ever, or this particular way is the best ever. Be agile and respond to things. And I think it's the classic, sort of Charles Darwin survival of the fittest. It wasn't really. It was survival of those who changed the best. And I think the businesses that have had the most success, the pop artists who've had the most success, are those who keep changing and innovating. So Madonna and David Bowie or whatever. Being agile and being able to just quickly sort of flip-flop a little bit. I think that's been quite an interesting way of thinking about technology or problems or careers. Is something will always come along and replace what you do or what you know, whether it's software or how you do something or whatever. I think it's important to be agile. And I think the other sort of flip side to that is just try and be young and fun still. Try and pick the jobs which you like and you get a bit of a smile out of. What we do is, it's important at times, but it's still only a career. So I think it's important to take it with a light-hearted view of the world, have a bit of a laugh, have a pint, have a laugh, have a joke, forget about it at the end of the day or the end of the week, and start again on Monday with that fresh perspective and be agile. Always learn as well. I'm a big fan of learning stuff, learning new things, whatever it's learning, via a manual or reading something or just chatting with people, getting people's perspectives, how you're doing something, why you're doing it. Always be on the lookout for little nuggets of information of some sort. And you may not use that straight away, but you will use it maybe at some point, and that sort of drifts back into that being agile thing and being fleet of foot and being responsive.
Filing it away for a later use.
Absolutely. There's another good one that I always heard. It was embrace uncertainty as well. I think it's a good one. So
I like
don't get too, this is the way I've always done it and this is definitely the right way. Maybe, and quite rightly, you're probably going to be wrong at some point. Things change and your opinion is probably going to get outdated. So embrace that uncertain aspect and be agile and allow yourself to change, I think, is a good one.
Adaptation, and weirdly enough, that's one of the things that when I mentor people, because I do try to give back as much as possible, and one of the things I do say to people is you've got to have the ability to adapt, because things change so quickly. 1 minute you're an advocate of this, and then all of a sudden, new technology will come out which will completely change the way of things. Or we get locked down and all of a sudden, yes, there was some certain amount of working from home and the ability to work from home beforehand, but then all of a sudden, boom, very few people comparatively are going back. And I mean, us as InfoSec people, I think a lot of people maybe not misunderstand, but they don't quite understand how big a change that actually was for us with defense in depth. Because 1 minute we're just protecting a network environment in an office space somewhere in London or somewhere in New York or whatever, with strings out to various different solutions that were out there, cloud technologies and stuff. And then, as you said earlier on, now the front room and the kitchen in everybody's house suddenly became the office with wireless that we couldn't control. We didn't have anything to do with, other devices on the same network that, feasibly could be doing all kinds of things, and it's interesting. But no, I like that. Adaptation is great. I always like to ask that question.
I think so. Agile, be young, fun and agile. Keep changing, and I think that way it keeps you interested. And I think if you are interested, you end up learning more, and then you do a good job, and you can give value back. I think that's
absolutely. So our time is coming to an end, Simon. Is there anything you want to kind of mention? Any content podcasts? You have to quickly sort of mention where we can find you for the Cyber Hut, that kind of thing.
Well, it's great to be on. Thanks for having us on. It's been a good chat for sure. The cyberhut.com is our sort of place of refuge. In there, there's a whole host of free research and information around cyber in general, or identity and access management, reports, research, and blogs. We do a whole host of stuff we give away for free to try and enable this ever confusing landscape we live in. And we do a podcast ourselves called The Week in Identity and stuff on there. But yeah, the cyberhut.com is a good place to start. You can find me on LinkedIn, or Simon at the cyberhut.com. You can spam me if you like via email. But yeah, I'd love to hear everybody's stories, or just reach out for a chat. I will always respond to emails. It might take a while, but I do get there in the end.
Simon, once again, it's been an absolute pleasure. And to all of you out there, have a great day, and we'll speak to you again soon.